Hey guys, we're going to do our first home learning lecture video. I've already recorded this once and it was 15 minutes long, so I'm going to give another shot at this. It's going to go hopefully a little bit quicker, and so I'm not consuming too much time. Without further ado, we're going to be talking about kind of the rise of totalitarian dictators in Europe between World War I and World War II. So the big three are going to be Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin. Most of Europe had pursued various forms of democracy after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. But Italy, Germany, and the Soviet Union kind of falls under the control of three powerful individuals. Mussolini was appointed Prime Minister of Italy in 1922 after marching on Rome with his paramilitary organization, the Black Shirts. And Stalin actually fully just seized power outright in 1924 after the death of Vladimir Lenin. So he takes control of the Soviet Union. And the last to join the party, if you will, was Hitler, who ran for president of Germany in 1932 but failed. And then he was appointed chancellor in 1933 and then fully seized power in 1934. Benito Mussolini starts his political career as a journalist for newspapers that promote socialism and communism. And he does separate from the National Socialist Party because they did not support Italy fighting in World War I. He was a diehard socialist, but they weren't aggressive enough and they weren't nationalistic enough. And so he cut his ties with that and moved on. He ends up forming his own political party, the Revolutionary Fascist Party, in 1915, which later becomes the National Fascist Party in 1921. So after serving in World War I, he becomes the leader of this fascist party. We'll have another video on kind of the difference of what is fascism. And one of the key things, though, is that he organizes a paramilitary group called the Black Shirts, and they help him by providing protection, but they're also kind of these mean, aggressive, violent bullies that go to other political rallies and disrupt. And so he gathers, I believe it's 30,000 of them, give or take, and they march on Rome. And the King of Italy basically says Mussolini is now, and the fascists are now our leaders. And so he's given the prime minister, the title of prime minister, in 1922. By 1925, though, he declares himself a dictator, and he kind of styles his own name, Il Duce. Mussolini targeted Slavic peoples as outsiders and continued to persecute their communities while he was in power. He also believed in living space for the Italian people. In 1935, because of this living space need and the desire to expand and feeling that African peoples were inferior, Italy invades Ethiopia in 1935. And then 1939, Mussolini and Hitler signed the Pact of Steel, which formalizes their alliance and establishes the Axis powers during World War II. Joseph Stalin started his political career as a socialist revolutionary, basically a gang leader. And they would extort money, they would rob banks, they would kidnap people for ransom, anything to raise money for the communist cause. He's ethnically from Georgia, which is a country bordered in the southern part of Russia by Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And he felt that the communists in his local community were not radical enough, and so he meets Vladimir Lenin and then joins the Bolshevik Party within the Russian Communist Party. After Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin seized power by exiling and eventually assassinating his main political rival, Leon Trotsky. So again, he's a rather ruthless dictator. And in 1927, he launches his first five-year plan to modernize the Soviet Union, which formally nationalized all the factories and collectivized the agriculture, meaning the government controlled, owned every factory that produced anything from shoes to cannons. And the collectivized agriculture meant that all the farmers essentially worked for the government. All the crops that they produced were then given directly to the government. That, of course, had some side effects, and in 1932 to 1933, the Holodomor genocide occurs. Basically, it's a man-made famine caused by Stalin, mostly in Ukraine, and many historians agree between 7 and 10 million people starved to death. Food was confiscated not only from the farms, but also from people's homes, so that it could be redistributed to other citizens in the Soviet Union. 1936-1938, Stalin commits the Great Purge, which essentially gets rid of all of his political rivals and oppositions to his authority. So he kills basically many of his Communist Party members that were around him that he did not trust. 1939, again a big year, the Soviet Union signs the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, and it's not a formal alliance. They were not friends. Hitler and Stalin did not trust each other. They never met. They hated each other. They were never going to be friends, but the Non-Aggression Pact allowed Russia to stay out of the fight, and it also reduced the risks to Hitler invading Poland, which essentially kicks off World War II. 2 slides on Adolf Hitler is not enough. So I'm just going to hit some of the major points. Hitler aspired to be an artist as a young man, but he failed to get into the Vienna School of Arts. When he goes off to World War I, he's given the job as a dispatch runner, and he's hospitalized twice. Once he took shrapnel to the leg in a mortar attack, and the second time he became temporarily blind from a mustard gas attack. He had a big bushy mustache, tried to put on the gas mask, it wouldn't seal around the edges. After he survived that, he shaved that characteristic short mustache so that his gas mask could always seal. He joins the National Socialist Party, short Nazi Party, in 1920, and he gains fame as a public speaker. There are many videos out on the internet about how his rhetoric and how his speech was very influential on large groups of people. He did lead a failed coup attempt in Munich, and he was put on trial for treason. He was arrested, but the trial actually made him more famous because the judge allowed him to kind of speak at length to basically Nazi propaganda. And that gained him more fame, even though he did go off the prison on a 5-year prison sentence. Only serves 8 months, and he's released on parole. But while in prison, he writes his famous book, Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. All throughout Hitler's rise to power, he also uses a paramilitary organization called the SA. I'm not even going to try the German. And they were there for the protection of the Nazi Party, but they also used to intimidate other political parties and individuals. In the 1932 election, Hitler ran for president but lost to Hindenburg, who was in his 80s at this point. But he gained, again, more and more fame and notoriety. Within a year, he's appointed to the chancellorship. The president appoints the chancellor, and that happened in January of 1933. In February, the German parliament building, the Reichstag, catches on fire. And Hitler's very fast to blame the communists, and then they start off, which kicks off this communist purge. They are able to suspend all the civil liberties of every German citizen so that they can search without warrants. And by March, he convinces Hindenburg to sign the Enabling Act, which allows Hitler and his cabinet members to basically make any law they want, and it doesn't have to go through the official channels. They can just wave a magic wand and poof, it becomes a law. By 1934, of course, because he has his power, he becomes a full dictator, and he establishes the Third Reich. Reich translates to empire. So it's the Third German Empire. 2 slides again is not enough. I have to mention these 3 key ideologies of Nazism. First of all, they're anti-Semitic, against all beliefs and peoples of Jewish faith. Legally considered non-citizens, they were not even seen as people or not as equal human beings to the Nazis and to other Germans. Speaking to that, they also promoted the Aryan master race, which identifies pure German ancestry, and it also focused on who was not Aryan, which would be members of the Jewish community, the Roma or Gypsies, and Slavic peoples. Lastly, they really pushed Lebensraum or living space, and you can look at more information about this if you want, but essentially it justified Nazi expansion into Europe. All right, that was a pretty quick lecture. Again, take a look at the slides, take a look at the readings. Hopefully it wasn't too fast, and we'll check in with you guys next time.